Okay, welcome everyone to Bilkent University Library's Art Gallery and for what is our first library lunchtime lecture of this semester. As you may know, we had scheduled a lecture by Professor Lale, but due to some health problems he had to delay. We will postpone his lecture until May. You will receive notification about that. This is the first of our lectures to take place since Bilkent University and the world lost Hocabe, Professor İhsan Doğrumacı. So I just want to express the sadness and regret on behalf of the library for his passing. Before we start, and I'll try and keep my comments quick to give our speaker plenty of time, I would just ask you all to either switch off your cell phones or turn them to silent mode so that we do not disturb the talk. Our speaker today is Dr. Lale Demirtürk, and her title, the Contemporary African-American Novel, Critical Conversations on the City. She is an associate professor in the Department of American Culture and Literature. She received her BA, her bachelor's degree from Hacettepe, and then she moved to Iowa in the US and received her MA from the University of Iowa in 1982, and then her PhD from the same university in 1986. Her dissertation was entitled Female Identity in Cross-Cultural Perspective, Immigrant Women's Autobiographies, and this was published by UMI in 1987. Dr. Demirtürk's research interests primarily focus on the 19th and especially 20th century American novel, and especially African-American novelists. And she's interested in the theme of the image of whiteness in these novels. She's published extensively in international journals and has also published two books. I shall try and pronounce the first one, which was in Turkish, Çağdaş Amerikalı Zenci Romancılar. Okay, tamam mı? Okay? Yeah, tamam. Which translates as The Modern African-American Novelists. Her second book, published only 2 years ago, How Black Writers Deal with Whiteness, Characterization Through Deconstructing Color, okay, is a very important contribution to this subject, I think, and relates largely to the subject we have today. So without further ado, I will invite our speaker up to take the podium and to give her talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Can it stay here?
Can you stay or here if you want?
Okay, thank you. Thank you for coming during the lunch period for this talk. Now, before I start the paper, I have to say that it is very difficult for us researchers of literature to really pick a few books, let's say novels, and really try to create some context for them and just try to talk about what commonalities or lack of commonalities these books may have with each other. You have to become a bit redundant at certain times because not each book can be comparable to another book. And novel is a social form, after all, that in the long run changes or transforms the society at large. So it is not very easy to come up with 6 novels and just to talk about what seems to be common. So you have to sort of narrow down your perspective to some part of each novel in order to kind of unify what you are going to talk about. So that's what I did. I just tried to really make it as short as possible. So I had to really condense my paper to the shortest possible. If anyone has any questions about each novel, if anyone is interested in making comments or asking about or asking questions about some of the novels, please feel free to do so. Now, I just wanted to start with Sidney Poitier image, not because he is involved or included in the critical conversations about the city as the subtitle goes, But he seems to have a place in relation to the US President Barack Obama in looking at how race issues may be handled in such a way that there will be a sense of cooperation, a sense of integration among many racial or non-racial, white or non-white people in the American society, since these African-American novels, which are mainly set in urban places, cities, or more than one cities, as we will see. Now, Sidney Poitier, for those of you who are in my generation, and for our students from the department with whom we really watched the DVD of Guess Who is Coming to Dinner that came out in 1967, it is not very hard to remember what he may represent. Although Sidney Poitier's image and his role in popular culture is something that goes beyond the course curriculum in which we show these DVDs. If we have time after the talk is over, if any comments come up, Sidney Poitier has a very controversial image, in fact, among black people, both positive and negative, which I didn't really get into because our subject is not about that. Now, Sidney Poitier was very famous in 50s, 60s, I don't know in how many other decades. Certainly he became the voice of this cultured blackness, giving very good, or giving rather the account or playing the role in certain processes where he really won the struggle. So in message movies, as they are called, he was representing, or he did represent, many different kinds of roles. So it was unlike many of the racial stereotypes of blacks who appeared in certain movies or in various parts of popular culture. Now, in August 1967, the reporters kept asking the black actor Sidney Poitier about urban race riots in Detroit. After answering a few questions, Poitier voiced his anger in his refusal to be defined merely by his skin color, because there are many aspects of my personality that you can explore very constructively, he said. But you ask me questions that fall continually within the Negro-ness of my life, unquote. More than 40 years later, Poitier was presented with America's highest civilian honor, the Presidential Medal of Freedom, by President Barack Obama in August 2009 at the White House for highlighting the issue of racism while opening up the possibility of reconciliation. In Obama's own words, Poitier, quote, not only entertained but enlightened, shifting attitudes, broadening hearts, revealing the power of the civil screen to bring us closer together, unquote. Poitier and Obama both seem to be devoted to promoting progressive images of white people in different areas of life. In this context, the representations of lived experiences of blacks in the contemporary African-American novel also speak to the need to transcend, to go beyond socially constructed racial boundaries in order to transform the United States into a more integrated democratic society. By opening new conversations about the city and urban encounters in everyday life, the African-American novelists attempt to forge new ways of looking at interracial relations, mainly between white Americans and black Americans, so to speak. The American sociologist Saskia Sassen defines our images and conceptions of the city as a strategic lens for producing critical knowledge, not merely about the urban issues, but also about sociocultural configurations in the society at large. Starting with the late 19th century, urban novels have played an important part in the expression of a particularly African-American search for identity in an attempt to produce that critical knowledge about the city as social space. Representations of the city is crucial to understanding racialized and gendered spaces through which African-American urban subjects' struggles are depicted, because they reveal unequal social processes and power relations. While doing that, they do not always offer a bleak environment in which the city dehumanizes the black people, but also represents spaces in which the individual flourishes, develops himself or herself in many ways. In this context, the emergence of African-American urban novels such as Percival Everett's I Am Not Sidney Poitier, published in 2009, Walter Mosley's Little Scarlet, published in 2004, John Edgar Wideman's Two Cities, published in 1998, Colson Whitehead's The Intuitionist, published in 1999, Asha Bandele's Daughter, published in 2003, and Diane McKinney Whetstone's Leaving Cecil Street, published in 2004, call for a new mapping of the city with multiple meanings and images. Percival Everett's I Am Not Sidney Poitier opens in 1968 when the black male protagonist / narrator of the novel Not Sidney is born, named by his late mother whose last name is Poitier. A major investor in a TV channel, she names her son Not Sidney, which creates a complicated identification problem for her son. You know, the negation processing in the society for the brain, so everybody links that name to the kind of name that they are used to hear, and that's automatically Sidney Poitier. His name is not Sidney Poitier, but he looks like Sidney Poitier. So that also creates lots of other complications. As she dies when he's 11, Not Sidney inherits not only an incredible amount of wealth with a number of shares in the Turner Broadcasting Corporation, but he also grows up under the watchful eye of Ted Turner, based on the real white person who founded CNN. Now, all through the novel, Not Sidney's adventures are scenes from different Poitier films, such as Lilies of the Field, The Defiant Ones, Guess Who is Coming to Dinner. When Not Sidney goes through a series of communication problems, he has to identify himself as, quote, I am not Sidney Poitier, unquote. The deputies who arrest him suspecting that he stole the car he owns call him Sidney because of his insistence that he is not Poitier. When he is free, he buys his way into college by financing the institution. After several problems related to his identity, he gets arrested as an alleged murderer by the deputy because he carries his own money, totaling up to $50,000 in cash in a bag, to help the nuns build a church. Quote, this here is a lot of money for a nigger to be carrying around, unquote. As he looks at the corpse at the morgue, he realizes that the dead black boy is his real self, and he becomes his double, Sidney Poitier, who flies to LA, where he is welcomed as the celebrity and receives an award. In his speech, he tells his audience that the following words will be written on his headstone, as much as on his mother's headstone as well. Quote, I am not myself today, unquote. In exploring the meaning of being black via Sidney Poitier, the symbol of cultured blackness, Everett lets Not Sidney confront the reality of negative stereotypes. His experiences are located in scenes from Poitier films, carrying the implication that his individuality as a young black man is mere fiction because he, unlike Poitier, fails to develop alternative social spaces where he can be his own person. The novel is certainly an attack on restrictive fictions of identity, highlighting their real effects. Percival Everett does it with his earlier novels like Erasure and other novels like Wounded as well. Walter Mosley's Little Scarlet, the ninth novel in Easy Rowling series, this deconstructs the white power and authority in the Black Watts ghetto in 1960s Los Angeles. The novel opens in the aftermath of the Watts riots in 1965, in which 34 people died. Since white men's presence in Watts may rekindle the racial tension, the LAPD appoints Easy Rawlins, an unlicensed black detective, to investigate the murder of Nola Payne, a black woman whose nickname is Little Scarlet. Her aunt Geneva claims that she must be killed by her white boyfriend, who is considered as the primary suspect later on by the police. On the contrary, Easy gradually discovers that the racially mixed street hobo Harold, whom Easy had reported to the police in the past as the murderer of black women, proves to be the real criminal. The novel's introduction of the social domain of Black Watts as a symbolic site of black rage demonstrates that the police use the ghetto space as a tool for crime punishment to oppress the blacks there. Easy speaks through different discourses of blackness. He sometimes acts as the submissive black in particular contexts when especially he wants to play safe. At other times, however, he becomes threatening in his denial to perform the submissive role the white dominant culture assigns to him. Then he gets into trouble, of course. The fear of the dark races is located in urban spaces, especially after the Watts riots. Along the same lines, Mosley configures LA in the text as an endangered home, within quotation marks, where racial hysteria still prevails, as Easy shares with his girlfriend Bonnie, a Caribbean woman. The contradictory space of white authority in a city where the ghetto constitutes blackness as otherness calls for an understanding of how racialized processes are implicated in the global manifestations of blackness. These manifestations are localized, and the different black cultures such as Caribbean, Southern, Middle Eastern, and white cultures such as Anglo-Saxon and German from all over the world are re-territorialized or relocated in the fictional urban landscape of LA. Criminalization of race becomes a tool of white corporate culture for downgrading racial otherness and its related urban spaces. It collapses differences among different blacknesses into one monolithic otherness located on the margins of the city. In this context, Easy refuses to experience his blackness as a racialized cultural space that stretches between the black ghetto and the white city. Diverse conceptualizations of blackness provide us with a different form of discourse about the city, particularly when memory device enables the cities to be mediated through the subjective thoughts of the characters, as in Weidman's, Bandele's, and McKinney Whetstone's novels. They allow for the construction of alternative representations of the lived city while showing how the role of memory as a reconstructive experience is central to any critical urban discourse. In this context, John Edgar Weidman's Two Cities talks back to the issue of how black bodies are constructed as problematic spaces, while it locates questions of space and race in the framework of the black lived body. Set in Pittsburgh in 1995, 10 years after the actual move bombing in Philadelphia in 1985, the novel is based on Mr. Mallory's experiences in Pittsburgh via his memories of Philadelphia, a city where he both met and lost to John Africa, the move leader. While reinforcing the image of Emmett Till's lynched body, the novel revolves around three major characters who narrate their own stories in a narrative collage of voices. Robert Jones, Casima's boarder and lover, who is a 50-year-old divorced black man. Casima, a 35-year-old widow whose husband died of AIDS in jail and whose two sons were killed in black gang violence in the city. So this is black-on-black violence. And Mr. Mallory, who is Casima's elderly brother, and Mr. Mallory, who is Casima's elderly boarder, a war veteran and photographer. Mr. Mallory studies words in a dictionary and takes pictures of black ghetto youth. During his daily walks in the city, he imagines talking to and sharing everyday spaces with John Africa. Mallory's death after his long-time decease creates an opportunity for the broken relationship between Casima and Robert to start all over again. Now, I didn't really want to go deeper into the novel. If there are any comments, I'll refer to that. But Mr. Mallory takes very interesting photographs in the style of Romare Bearden, the African-American painter, who always has a collage of photographs in order to show the black body both as fluid, not as restricted to one black body. So when you look at these photographs of Bearden, you actually feel like there's always more than one and very different black bodies. It's impossible to really stereotype black body on the basis of the photographs he takes. And also Mr. Mallory keeps writing letters to Giacometti, the Swiss sculptor. Of course he gets no answer because Giacometti is long dead, but he shares all kinds of different forms of vision of what his photographic art should look like in the future. Because if you know that Giacometti's sculptural pieces are sometimes giant-like and sometimes very minimal. And Giacometti always thought that in his art he should capture the real world, but he knew it would be impossible because everything was fluid, shifting and changing in real life. But he still kept going on with that vision. And produced for a long time in the kind of mission of art that he wanted to. So Mr. Mallory tries to apply different techniques of Giacometti because Giacometti always said, if you turn your face once and look at the same body or any object, again, it won't be the same object or it won't be the same body. So Mr. Mallory wants in his photographs to have a real representation of young ghetto blacks as full, complex human beings talking to one another, talking to Mr. Mallory while he takes the photos. A lifelike project. He calls it photo-taking project. The novel begins with the narrator, Mr. Mallory's search in the dictionary for the synonyms of the word zoo, which depicts the dominant image of the city all through the text. In fact, the zoo by definition is not only a realm that defines the human, but is also a site of surveillance conducted by human beings over the animals' movements. The word zoo in the novel resonates with the images and ideas about urban ghettoization. The images of surveillance of captured bodies of animals and of blacks in diverse places such as the zoo, World War II Italy, and the black ghetto pervade the novel. Mr. Mallory's memories in Pittsburgh of how he used to take long walks with John Africa in Philadelphia bring about the sense that Mr. Mallory has two cities. Actually, I remember John Edgar Wideman, the author, who said in an interview that he believes that every person has two cities. One in which he or she lives, and the other he or she imagines about or had actually lived through. And that city is not the lived city, but the past city where that character or individual lived in. The MOVE bombing makes us question what the urban world is all about. MOVE is an abbreviated form of the organization called movement. It was back to nature movement, and there were political problems between the movement members. It was called just MOVE to mean movement. John Africa was the nickname of Leopard, who was the actual leader of the organization MOVE. So Whiteman recreates this also in his novel Philadelphia Fire. So the MOVE bombing keeps coming back to Mr. Mallory's mind. Sometimes he lives with it, and he keeps talking back to John Africa. Quote, "What kind of world is this, John Africa?" He imagines asking his friend. "Homes bombed, women and children roasted alive," unquote. Mr. Mallory wants his photos to impact the black ghetto youth in similar ways to how the photographs of the lynched Emmett Till encouraged black communal bonding in the wake of the Civil Rights Movement. The novel ends with Cassima and her lover Robert holding a funeral for Mr. Mallory, deciding to publicly reveal his photo-taking project of non-stereotypical representations of young blacks in the city. The novel leads us to believe that these photographs will help black ghetto youth to redefine themselves in the future as a real part of the city. Asha Bandele's daughter challenges the prevailing ways of thinking about race and urbanity, not perhaps in the same way Mr. Mallory wants to do or Whiteman wants to do through this character, Mr. Mallory, but in a different sense, because the novel develops an alternative discourse on the city through imagined pasts of each character. The agency of African Americans helps reconstruct the city as a text to be read differently. That seems to come out of the novel. And James Donald believes that the city constitutes an imagined environment, he says, because there are diverse ways of reading the city. The plot summary highlights this diversity. The young black girl Aya's relationship with her mother Miriam is severe because Miriam has to work hard to earn a living. Aya's desire for fun with a man ends up in her murdering him. Aya, on probation, spends her year in going to school and studying hard to learn to be a proper daughter and a proper student. Feeling free only when she jogs on the streets, Aya is soon murdered by a policeman who mistakenly believes she's a criminal running away from somebody else. All through her days at the hospital where she dies, Aya is visited by her mother, whose memories take us to the experiences which shaped her into a woman who, quote, had tried to invent herself as an entity who needed no one, unquote. Calling in on Bird, her lover and Aya's father, Miriam remembers her two separate lives in Brooklyn. Overly protected by her religious, class-conscious parents, in an oppressive household, and growing up in a friendless environment, Miriam's deep love for Bird, a janitor at school, opens up a new space for her. Bird's ability to read the city also makes him keen on his plans for the future. All he wants is to get a decent education. Despite the fact that Brooklyn seems to be an urban jungle due to police brutality against young ghetto blacks, it was here that Bird could always call himself back to hope, back to vision, unquote. Since Miriam and Bird are unmarried, Miriam's pregnancy turns into a nightmare when white policemen shoot him to death. Her memories of the past are brought together with the Brooklyn in the present, which now becomes an urban home where black communal sharing is the only hope for survival. The sense of community that brings Miriam back to herself is something she herself promotes to other female inmates in jail, where she is put for the attempted murder of a police officer to avenge her daughter's murder. The novel valorizes white and black communal bonding as necessary for social transformation of the city, heading us towards a future with a deeper urban consciousness. Diane McKinney Whetstone's Leaving Cecil Street presents a set of memories of her characters in an African-American middle-class residential neighborhood in West Philadelphia, trying to forget their painful pasts and try to create a hopeful future for themselves in their present lives in 1969. As these city people learn to become a community, as Cecil Street community of blacks, the street seems to come alive with the people talking with each other in helping develop an urban identity. In other words, living purely in the present to the degree they can. Cecil Street represents the urban neighborhood where the annual Block Party reinforces the strong sense of black community. The impact of the communal bonding on the Cecil Street reminds us of what the writer said of her novel in an interview called, "I hope that people take with them the beauty, the closeness of this block. So much is made of the negative aspects of African American communities, the crime, the drugs, poverty, and I am not suggesting that those conditions do not exist, but all over the country there have been African American communities that are desirable places to live," unquote. Cecil Street people seem to reinforce their public identity as residents, gradually transforming the street into a kind of location, a place, as Jane Jacobs would argue, because they settle for some form of togetherness, unquote. Hence, the street residents develop an urban understanding of place and community as the basis of constructing alternative relations to the dominant social order. They do not see themselves as the victims of their pasts any longer. In the context of all these novels, Colson Whitehead's The Intuitionist makes an effective statement on the urban construction of whiteness and its spatial practices. These are the words that Henri Lefebvre uses in his book, The Production of Space, in an attempt to negotiate the complex relationship between modernity, whiteness, and the urban. Constructing an image of New York City, a place which Whitehead never names, but visualizes with its clearly identifiable places, Whitehead himself suggests in an interview with Laura Miller that he is, quote, dealing with serious race issues, but not handling them in a way that people expect, unquote. The novel depicts alienated working class people who fail to achieve upward mobility in the society. Lila Mae Watson is the city's second African American, but the first woman elevator inspector. The elevator she inspects through her intuitionist methods, she learned as a student from James Fulton's books, undergoes a total free fall when it has no passenger inside. While Lila Mae herself starts to investigate who may have sabotaged the elevator, which we will never learn, she gets entangled in the power struggle in urban politics. The accident is taken to be a sabotage of different parties of the elevator industry. Competitive parties search for Fulton's black box to decode how the cities of the future will be shaped in order for them to have hegemonic power over the city. Ironically, they do not know that Fulton was a black man who passed for white, a fact Lila Mae discovers in her search for truth. The city, as Fulton's argument shows, is to be considered as a social space that needs to be transformed with a vision of the future. Fulton invites white people to raising questions about the meaning of what they see, namely the white dominant city that has to be de-racialized, because there is another world beyond this one, unquote. Fulton himself seems to be the real perfect elevator, the person who elevates, of the future cities in his call for democratizing urban spaces. Elevator space represents Fulton's third space, a term Edward Soya uses, quote, to capture what is actually constantly shifting and changing in the city, unquote. Whitehead calls for an alternative urban politics, which will transform the city into a site of social diversity. Now, all in these novels, by all these writers, we have a representation of the city with the possibilities for opening up cultural spaces where alternative urban discourse can be negotiated. These novels play a crucial role in generating new symbolic representations based on the lived experiences of black people who try to become, in their own ways, critical readers of the city. What this means for these writers is to engage a critical conversation on democracy in similar terms to Sidney Poitier's embodiment of, quote, the black participation in the American democratic tradition, unquote, through his characterization of universal human virtues. The French sociologist and philosopher Henri Lefebvre claims that social order is implicated in the ordering of urban spaces, and hence there are obviously called beneficiaries of space, just as there are those excluded from it, unquote. In this context, the representation of urban spaces in the contemporary African-American urban novel offers new strategies of deconstructing the city as a place of blacknesses in the long and rewarding struggle to become a truly post-racial society. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lale. Or should I perhaps say not Zeynep? Okay, we have, I think, 10 minutes or so for questions. So if anyone wishes to ask not Zeynep a question, you can fire away now.
You disrupt negating processes of everyone's brains. That's not very good. To call me not Zeynep.
I'm kind of surprised that contemporary African-American novels, when the authors are writing about the intersection of African-American characters and urban settings, and except for, not Sidney Poitier, it still means ghettos, crime.
Yeah,
gangs,
certainly.
Do we not have African-American authors writing about blacks on Wall Street? Or
How many African Americans do we have in American society who really enjoy upper middle class lives? That's also the question. But the point is, these are the novels in which most of the black characters are represented positively. They really, yes, there are some victims, but sometimes victims are victims because of their own doing, not necessarily because of the power structure over there. And the ghetto people are trying very hard to become somebody, which I think, Diane McKinney-Whetstone's novel is not considered as a very high literary book within quotes in that sense, but she certainly comes up with a way of how to have this human connectedness with each other, rather than talking about how you may be badly treated in some case in 60s in some other part of the United States, but in fact that you can change your life by trying to change your attitude to that life out there. Positive representations means not just all black characters are wonderful people. That would be another form of racism. That would be positive stereotyping of all black people as wonderful people, which is not true for any group of people. But some individuals can really stop pitying themselves. Rather than pitying themselves, they try to gain some kind of dignity so that they'll have some self-esteem, and that comes together with some sense of achievement that they actually have to do something. So in each novel, I think we have that. We have some city references in not Sidney Poitier novel as well, but I just did not want to go longer into that, and I hope I didn't exceed my time here. Okay.
Yeah, we're fine. Does anyone else have a comment or question?
But you see, that's a revision of the city visionary, if we may call it that way. I don't know. A different vision of the city. Yes, certainly.
Could you talk more about how these novels imagine the space of the city changing?
Well, some of them, not Sidney Poitier, for instance, yes, it's a very different way of talking to the body of Sidney Poitier when the audience doesn't know that the voice belongs to not Sidney Poitier, the double. But there is some agency to some extent there. Yes, he is thrown to that situation. It wasn't his own doing. Somebody killed himself and he became his double, Sidney Poitier, but the audience doesn't know. I am not myself today, I think would start, that sense of consciousness may start something in the future, which I take the novel to mean that, because if you go through a sense of struggle to really fit into the socially acceptable images of white people in popular culture, you will never be yourself. But he now came to the moment of self-consciousness. A kind of sense of recognition that that self does not belong to him. Now, in the other novels, the intuitionist has this vision of the future cities to come, that we should really embrace one another with our differences. And I guess that comes back to post-colonial critic, Indian critic Homi Bhabha's The Location of Culture. In that book, in 2006 edition, he wrote a brand new introduction to the book in which he developed a new term called vernacular cosmopolitanism, where all the differences should be embraced. There should be a right to difference in equality, he says. I think we see some of it here too. In Cecil Street, people may just leave that street and turn back to their lives, but they try very hard. They try to help each other to really solve their personal problems. Most of them don't like each other, but they help each other out to stay together as a community. This is not counter-racism, that we should all stand together against the white society type of attitude, but a sense of love and respect, caring for everyone, that the city should be shared by all of them, rather than being scared to walk into the street or to walk out into the street when there is any kind of violence going on in 1960s. Daughter, the novel by Asha Bandele, is more interesting because sense of sharing the city as a common space, and that sense of consciousness that kindles that spirit comes up in the prison, when the mother tries to teach something to these women inmates in prison that she failed. She does something for these women in jail that she failed to do for her daughter. She never listened to her daughter. And now she tells these mothers or young single mothers to take the time to listen to their children, so that that family bond between the mothers and their children will help them to experience the city in a more positive way, within quotes, whatever that positive way means for each one of them. What was the other novel? Two Cities, thank you. In Two Cities, there is a positive ending, at least these young ghetto blacks who never appreciated that photo-taking project of Mr. Mallory, in which they could see their bodies as lively bodies that could not be fit into, manufactured as a kind of negative stereotype of worthless, criminal type black bodies, will be able, by just looking at their images, perhaps in the future, because there are so many negatives of pictures that are left from Mr. Mallory, that there is that hope since these young blacks, after some violent scene, pass these photos around, that they will be able to do these pictures in the future and try to develop their images, because that's what Mr. Mallory tried to do for them. Look at yourself in a new light. Try to make something of yourself. Doesn't matter if they failed in real life in the ghetto, but they could still become somebody by believing in themselves, by having that self-confidence, self-esteem, whatever. So I think these novels, of course, are not revolutionary within cause to in the sense that each writer has this kind of political vision. We can change the society as a whole, but each change starts at the individual level, so these will be the new ways or different ways of looking at different things. First, blacks should be able to look at themselves in a different way. If perception doesn't change or self-perception doesn't change, if you keep looking at yourself through the eyes of others, through indirect perception, you will never be able to develop yourself. And two, they should learn to look at white people in a different way. And at their social encounters, social relations with white, non-white, whoever is out there, at these people in the city. If there can be a sense of community, a kind of shared goals, feelings, that sense of community, it may be a black community or it may be white and black people forming a new community, like in the prison scene in Dothan. If there is that sense of group solidarity, people will become, or rather that they will feel they do become, a real part of the city out there. It's not like, oh, we're all ghetto people, so isolated from the rest of the city, we're always oppressed, that's why we can't get enough jobs, whatever kind of attitude there. That's what I think.
We have 3 minutes, if there's a quick final question.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment, being an American who grew up during the Sidney Poitier times, it really got me.
Grew up where?
Being an American who grew up during the Sidney Poitier times,
Oh.
it was very interesting to see this because I'm, having lived through it and seeing. I mean, I remember the great controversy when
Yes.
Guest Is Coming to Dinner came out. I mean, there were people. I'm from the New York area, and there were people who boycotted the theaters. There were people who didn't go. It was announced from the church pulpits how inappropriate this film was. Well, we think about that today. But what I was thinking about is somebody like Richard White and Black Boy, who wrote very similar things about the role of the black person in the city and so forth, and how people like him and other black authors of an earlier time, like Giovanni's Room, I can't think of his name.
James Baldwin.
James Baldwin. Really didn't become popular and come into the mainstream until after this early 60s thing.
Right.
And how influential Poitier as one icon really was. And now that, Richard Wright and so forth are really part of a curriculum that wouldn't have happened before that. And it's so nice to see this kind of stuff actually becoming, part of popular culture and also part of a curriculum.
Right, and also the images are changing. I mean, I read Gutsian's biography of Sidney Poitier, and I found these quotes from that book published in 2004. Some of the book, I didn't realize, because To Serve with Love was very influential in Turkey. That's way back in the past. And Guess Who Is Coming to Dinner was very influential, but we Turkish people sort of looked at these movies and just looked at the relations. I mean, we never thought that Sidney Poitier was one image, one type, one positive stereotype of black people, that blacks could have been very enraged about it. But it was after reading this book, this biography, that I realized that some blacks were so harsh in their comments. They put down Sidney Poitier. James Baldwin, if I am not mistaken, I think it was James Baldwin who wrote this long essay in which he said something like he wasn't accusing Sidney Poitier of representing the one type of positive cultured black personality who always tried to fit into a kind of white social expectation and played a nice guy, nice black guy. But he was accusing of the Hollywood film industry for always reducing the representations of black images to one type so that movies would sell better. That was very interesting way of looking at Hollywood industry as racist. Now coming to Giovanni's room, I cannot remember. I mean, that was about two male lovers,
I
right?
just couldn't think of James Baldwin's name, and that was.
But Black Boy is the autobiographical piece by Richard Wright in which he talks about how he developed himself, and he owes it to the city, of course. He had to migrate from the rural South, Mississippi, to Chicago, right? And read all these books in the library and different things. Thank you so much. It's nice to hear somebody who lived through these events because we keep reading about them through.
It's in my memory, but
Yeah.
Okay, we've run out of time. Will you all join me in thanking Dr. Lale
Thank you so much.
for her very I would also like to thank members of the library staff who do most of the work to set these talks up. It's a lot of work for them, including Urs Jumbe, the video expert. Our next talk is on the 21st of April, about 4 weeks' time. Professor Sinan Serters from mathematics will be giving us a very different kind of a talk from mathematical rather than literature. And if I can just add in one little plug before you all escape. As of yesterday, Bilkent University Library now has a Facebook page. So if you wish to become fans of Bilkent University Library, we'd be very happy to see you on there. Thank you very much. Thank you again, Lale.
Thank you, I'm Joe Malloy. I'm in the graduate education department, and I'm teaching English graduate students with Margaret. Yeah, you're welcome. It was a pleasure. It was a pleasure. Thank you. I got to run to that class.
Yes,
Thank you. Thank you.
İyi günler.
I was worried that at one point something came on the computer screen at the end, but no, right at the end, it didn't affect things. It said server connection broken. I was worried that you might...